Hey guys, thanks for taking a look at today's video. Before we get started, if you'd like to hire us for any of your upcoming tech projects, big or small, we do everything from network installs to managed services. So go ahead and make sure that you guys check out our website in the description below. Thank you guys. Hey guys, so today's video we're going to be looking at TrueNas. We're going to be going over anything you're going to need to look out for, the complete setup for TrueNas in 2022. And anything we talk about today can also be found in the link in the description. So let's get started. So a bit of history on TrueNas. TrueNas 12.0 came out in October of 2020, so a little bit ago, but many of us were used to its predecessor, what was called FreeNas, and a lot of us used FreeNas for the longest time, but TrueNas kind of came to overtake that. A little bit of difference was TrueNas actually moved from the FreeBSD version of OpenZFS to the multi-OS version of OpenZFS 2.0. This included, feature parity with the Linux version, also included a really wide range of performance improvements and enhancements and features to things like security, and just a lot of general file system enhancements that us as a community enjoyed to see. So that kind of brings us where we are today. Unfortunately, in this guide, we won't go over how to actually install it off of the USB. We're going to assume that you've already at least installed it on the bare bones. We're just going to more talk about the configuration and actual setup. So kind of bear with us. But yeah, so some of the prerequisites that they actually recommend for TrueNas, we're looking at a 2-core Intel 64-bit or an AMD x86 64 processor as our bare minimum. So pretty much just a 2-core minimum with 16 gigabytes of RAM as well as a 16 gigabyte boot SSD. This could be, a USB or an SSD. And at least 2 identical data drives of kind of the same manufacturer and same size work really well for this. Obviously, if you're going to do more, you can have more than 2, but 2 is a bare minimum to at least get parity with your data, because there's no point in just running one drive and losing all that data. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and take a tour upstairs of our current TrueNas server. We call him Rodger, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at Rodger and kind of see what we're running for our setup. So see you there. So this is Rodger. He is our Dell R730XD. We went ahead, we actually built another server previously before Rodger, but it wasn't really as reliable, so we kind of just bought 1 generation old hardware off of Tech Supply direct, and it's been amazing ever since. I mean, we got 100 terabytes for $5,000. We're running these Seagates right here. We're running these 10 terabyte enterprise drives. They've been really reliable, so everything's been running pretty smoothly. Make sure that you, like I said, you're going to need an HBA card when you're running this, because TrueNas is going to need to see all of these drives individually and not through something like a RAID card. So make sure you put whatever HBA you have, probably an LSI card. That's kind of what we recommend. But if you have an HBA on here, make sure it's in like IT mode, or that way it can pass all the drives through. But yeah, a quick search on the TrueNas forums and you should be able to find your current HBA and how to put it into IT mode and everything you guys need. So let's hop over to the configuration. We're actually going to set them up now. So awesome. So now that you guys have kind of gotten to see Rodger, let's kind of flip over to the software side and let's kind of go ahead and set up TrueNas. So once everything's installed, we're going to go ahead and go over to our storage and our disks. We're going to make sure everything appears in there. Everything looks fine and dandy. We see all of our drives as well as our 2 boot drives, so that looks great. So we can go ahead and go over to pools now, and we can go ahead and make our first pool. You guys kind of see we already have some pools made, but we can go ahead and just pretend that we don't have a pool here. So once you go to actually add your pool, it will kind of ask you how many drives you want. Do you want what kind of RAID do you want? Do you want RAID Z2 or Z3? And if you're kind of debating on what you want to run, RAID Z2 or Z3, depending on how many drives you have, one might be a better option than the other. Disk internals actually breaks it down really well. So RAID Z2 is more fault tolerant, uses 2 parity blocks as well as 2 data blocks from one piece of information. This is kind of an analog of RAID 6 and can also withstand the collapse as many as 2 disks. In RAID Z2, the maximum number of disks is you're going to need at least 4. You can go further and try RAID Z3, which has a maximum of at least 5 disks and the ability to survive damage up to 3 disks. So that may be a little bit more of a fault-tolerant and resistant option to data corruption, but just know that trying to restripe those drives once they do fail is going to take a little bit longer of a process. And RAID Z3's not super used just because of its size and also isn't really space efficient as some of the other RAID options. So kind of to each their own, do a little bit of research before you actually choose what you want your pool to run. We're currently running RAID Z3 just because we have so many drives in there. We just kind of, we do a lot of more long reads from our server instead of really random reads and small ones. We handle a lot of large video and stuff like that. So it works really well for us. But just kind of, check your use case, make sure you're doing something that you want and not for your specific use case. So if we go back over in the pool, you'll have your pool made. It may not have anything under there. So you're actually going to go to your pool and hit the 3 little buttons right there, and we'll hit an add data set. So a data set will kind of be like a slice or a subsection of the whole pool. You can just run a pool with one data set in it and just store everything in there like that. We kind of break our stuff down by, like, if we go back here, you'll see backups, finance, media, technical. So we kind of split stuff up. It's just good storage habits. But we can go ahead and make a test one to show you guys what it's like. So we'll go ahead and hit add data set. We're just going to name this one test and everything else. If you know that your share is going to be an SMB share for Windows, or if you're going to use that for Apple as well, we're just going to make an SMB, but you can just leave a generic if you're unsure and just want to make a generic data store. So that's in there. So now we have our test data set. So we're going to hit that and hit edit permissions. Now, before you do this, you're going to want to make users and groups and add those users to groups. So in here, you can just hit add new user. You can give them a username, a password. You can add them to a group and whatnot. I recommend doing that before you actually set the controls and stuff like that. But we'll go back to the storage and pools, and we'll go back into there. So we'll go under our test, and we'll edit permissions. And this is where we can actually give which users and groups we want to allow certain access to for the shares. So we can just do group, our group, we can just hit drop down. We can just kind of do, like, if we want to do our creative, we should have a creative arts group. We can just put that in there for testing, and we can go ahead and hit save. If you already do have a structure inside of your data set, you can apply them recursively. Note, it's a little bit risky. It may damage stuff, but I've done it, and for the most part, it's never broken anything. It just kind of applies everything to child items if you have stuff in there already. So it's a nice thing to note. But now we have our test data set inside of our pool we've made. So the last thing we really need to go down is into our sharing. We're going to make an SMB share because we're using Windows and Apple devices, so we kind of want to service both the end users. So we can go ahead and hit add under our SMB share. For our path, we're going to go down to our pool, and we see our test right here. It autofills in the name. We don't really need to touch it or do anything. A lot of people get confused, and they'll actually set permissions on the share, thinking they're setting permissions on the data set. So when they try and access the share, they're like, why can't I get in? You don't do anything with the share. You just make the share and add it, and you just hit submit, and you just leave it default. Let the share just be its thing. You set all the permissions back where we were before in the pools. You set it right there. Cool. So now we have our share added and everything like that. So now we can access it over the network, and we should be able to get to it just fine. Another thing to keep in mind is scrubs. So a lot of people will forget that this exists. Luckily, TrueNas, when you make a pool, it sets up tasks that run by default. If you have a lot of data, you may want to scrub a little bit more often. If you don't have a lot of data, you can kind of let the scrubs run, once a month. But basically, scrubbing just makes sure that all the data is still intact and prevents against things like bit rot. So if you kind of leave your data stagnant and don't verify it, things can kind of drift and it gets really messy really fast and kind of corrupt a lot of stuff. So just make sure you have a scrub task on there. This one I believe runs every 35 days or so, which we're actually running a little bit more data, so I'm probably going to change that to every 15. But just set it to a time in a day where not a lot of usage is active to kind of save some of the I/O on the disks. But just make sure you have that enabled, because you may store something on the server in a month, come back and it be gone, which would be terrible. So just something to keep in mind as you're setting up your TrueNas server, to make sure all your scrubs are in place. Another awesome thing that is here as well is if we go to directory services, you can integrate it with Active Directory. So all you'll need to do is just set up a service account, connect it to the domain, and once it's connected, you can go back to your pool. If you go back to your system, actually, not system, if we go back to our storage, and if we go back to pools, you can go back into the data set itself, and then you can go back to the ACLs. If we hit edit, if you go back into edit permissions, you can actually do the group, and in the group itself, you can select the AD groups, and you can also select AD users. So it kind of allows you to integrate the TrueNas server with Active Directory and use it pretty seamlessly. I haven't had many bad reports on it. It usually works really well. So that's another option you guys can kind of do with integration, but for the most part, we pretty much have our basic TrueNas server set up. Another thing too to keep in mind is your network configuration. You can actually go ahead and go to your interfaces. You can set up things like LAAGs, so you can do link aggregation. So if you guys have two 10 gig SFPs and you want to LAAG them together, you can go ahead and do that right in here. It's all available for you to set up here. But other than that, we're pretty much set up. One final thing I recommend everyone do is go to Backblaze or go to Amazon. TrueNas can integrate with pretty much any B2, S3 provider, and you can just have cloud sync tasks in here, and you can push and pull. I highly recommend grabbing your critical data sets that you want to sync to the cloud, like your financial drive, your technical drive, maybe even your creative arts drive, whatever you have running on it. Just make sure that you're saving it to the cloud somewhere, because this works really, really well. And Backblaze is relatively cheap compared to Amazon or Azure. So this is where you can kind of do it. It's awesome. You just put your keys inside of the, you should be able to go down to, should be under system. Yep, if you go to system, cloud credential, you can just go ahead and put your provider in there. We're using B2. And you can go ahead, once your cloud credentials are in there, you can go ahead and set a task up, and then your cloud sync tasks. We don't have any in here right now because we actually just finished one of our cloud syncs. But yeah, you can just do it right there. So it's super simple, super easy to set up, not terribly too much to it. So all in all, we're just really trying to capture how TrueNas has kind of stood up the test of time in 2022. We think it's still great. Obviously, we know TrueNas has some competitors like Unraid, and that'll be some future videos we plan to kind of get to you guys. But we really see Unraid and a lot of the other Docker-esque based file systems that kind of just try and be the all-in-one, more for the home users. This is more for the home lab / kind of getting into small, medium business, enterprise-esque functionality. TrueNas, from what we've used it just works. It's built on ZFS, one of the best file systems you can really run any of your NAS on. Super reliable, great team, great updates. I've been in their Jira forums multiple times. They're super great guys. They work on this thing constantly. They're pretty receptive. I actually had some Kerberos issues with AD one time, and they were on it. So as far as support, this is a great product. And we kind of hope you guys enjoyed this little mini guide on how to set it up. And like I said, anything we talk about will kind of be linked in the description. So if you guys want to check any LSI cards we recommend or anything that we kind of talk about, you can find it right down there. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Have a great one.